What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today, as I always do on Thursdays, bringing you the wide receiver and tight end starts and sits for week 8 of fantasy football. In this video, I'm going to be going over every matchup, every fantasy relevant wide receiver and tight end, whether you should be starting them, sitting them, flexing them, whatever the case is, buying them low, selling them high, whatever the case is, I will talk about it in this video. Of course, I'll go through all the wide receiver cornerback matchups for all of the fantasy relevant wide receivers. So stick around to the end to see everything that you need to know for week 8 of fantasy football. As always, if you enjoy this video, go down to the bottom, hit the button that looks like this. Like button helps us out tremendously. Comment any of your thoughts down below as well. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. Let's hit the intro and then we'll get right into this. All right, we're going to start it with Thursday night football, Packers at Cardinals. Again, I talked about it yesterday, but we finally have a good Thursday night game. In this game, you're going to be starting DeAndre Hopkins, flexing Christian Kirk, and sitting pretty much everybody else. With Davante Adams and Allen Lazard out for this game, I'm personally not going to be messing around with Marquez Valdes-Scantling off of a hamstring injury. Randall Cobb is currently my wide receiver 44, so if you have to start a Packers wide receiver, he would be the guy that I'm going with, but he's just outside of start territory for me. But a guy that you could use if you're desperate, if you need somebody. On the Cardinals side of things, Hopkins is still an every week starter. We saw him get a good amount of targets last week. He gets Eric Stokes in shadow coverage, according to PFF this week, who, despite allowing a 56% catch rate on the year, has been targeted 41 times in total and allowed 271 yards and 2 touchdowns in his coverage. So DeAndre Hopkins, a guy that probably is in for a big one in this game. Christian Kirk is the number 2 in this offense, in my opinion. We've seen enough data, enough time on the field to know that Christian Kirk is probably going to be the second most valuable fantasy receiver consistently in this Cardinals offense. He's the guy that I would start if I need a secondary Cardinals receiver. He's going up against Shandon Sullivan in coverage. As you guys can see, Randall Cobb going up against Byron Murphy in coverage. Not the greatest matchup in the world for him. He is the best corner on the Cardinals. So that is the Packers at Cardinals wide receivers. At the tight end position, I think both of these guys are streamable. Neither guy is like an every week starter necessarily, but both Zach Ertz and Robert Tonyan, especially with Davante Adams and Allen Lazard out, Robert Tonyan will probably get a little bit more run in the passing game. Darren Waller and Mark Andrews on bye this week. You could probably grab either of these guys off your waiver wire or just put them into your lineup because they are good streamable options in a potentially high scoring game. They are my tight end 12 and tight end 13 respectively on the week. So I would start these guys, in that back end tight end 1 range, but I would start, Ricky Seals-Jones, Tyler Higbee, Hunter Henry, Dalton Schultz over both of these guys if you have to make that decision. So moving from the Thursday night game into 1 p.m., Bengals at Jets, the first game that we have here. In this game, you're going to be starting Jamar Chase, starting T. Higgins. I think you can probably low-end flex Corey Davis and sit Tyler Boyd. So let's start with the Bengals side of things because it's very exciting. Jamar Chase is doing shit that we've really never seen from a rookie wide receiver. This guy is on pace for 1,850 yards and 15 touchdowns, which would smash his former teammate Justin Jefferson's record that he set last year of 1,400. So Jamar Chase, man, this guy's wide receiver 3 in ECR this week, and he's set up for another good matchup. And T. Higgins, I talked about as a buy low this week. The Bengals offense has turned a corner relatively, compared to what they were doing early in the season. They were running the ball quite a bit, especially in neutral game scripts and when they were ahead. In the past couple of weeks, we've seen them pass the ball quite a bit more. And if they can continue on this trend, they can continue passing the ball about 35 times a game. Higgins will become a consistent 8 to 10 target guy and a guy that I think you can throw into your lineup every week as like a wide receiver 2. Hopefully this passing volume continues because we want to see them pass the ball. We want to see Jamar Chase and T. Higgins get involved in the passing game a lot more than they were at the beginning of the season. So that is definitely good news for those guys. On the Jets side of things, Davis is somebody that I think you could still toss into your flex because he has like a 22% target share, but he's barely inside my top 40 at wide receiver. So he's not a guy that I'm excited to start. With Zach Wilson out, we don't know who's going to be starting this game. We're assuming it's going to be Mike White because Joe Flacco was just traded for. So I'm assuming Mike White's going to come in and be the starting quarterback of this team. We saw him target his running backs heavily last week, so hopefully we can see Elijah Moore and Corey Davis, Jamison Crowder get more involved in the offense, but Corey Davis is the only guy that I'm willing to actually throw into my lineup in this game, not really messing around with Jamison Crowder or Elijah Moore in this one. As you guys can see on the screen, we do have the matchups for both teams. T. Higgins set to see Bryce Hall in coverage. Jamar Chase set Brandon Echols is the worst corner on the New York Jets, and Jamar Chase is going to probably wipe the floor with him. So I'd imagine that Jamar Chase is going to be in for another big one in this one. Tyler Boyd actually gets the only real good corner for the Jets, which is the rookie Michael Carter II in the slot. So Tyler Boyd, not a guy I am going to be starting, like I said, in this game. Corey Davis expected to see shadow coverage from Chidobe Awuzie, according to PFF. So again, a guy just on the borderline of wide receiver 40 territory, not a guy that I think is a smash play, but you probably could play him if you need to. So at the tight end position in this game, you're going to be sitting CJ Uzomah. The usage simply isn't there for CJ Uzomah. He's making big plays happen. He's running about 75% of the routes, but the targets are very inconsistent. He has a 9% target share on the year. And even in these past couple of games, when he's been performing, it's still only like a 9 to 10% target share. So if you're desperate with buys, if you have Darren Waller or Mark Andrews on buy, I suppose you could do worse than CJ Uzomah, but not a guy that I want to be relying on if you think you stumbled into a tight end the rest of the season. I would probably sell high on him if some of your league mates believe that he's going to be a great tight end option this year. So moving on to the Titans at Colts, the next game that we have here. In this game, you're going to be starting A.J. Brown, starting Michael Pittman Jr., and flexing Julio Jones. So on Michael Pittman Jr., he's pretty much been a solidified number one wide receiver for the Colts all season, 23% target share and 34% of the team's air yards. Carson Wentz starting to play a little bit better. They're starting to get a little bit more healthy along the offensive line. So I think Michael Pittman Jr. is a guy that we can pretty much lock into top 30 wide receiver production week in and week out. On the Titan side of things, this duo has been kind of weird to figure out all year. We've had hamstring injuries for both guys. A.J. Brown had his famous Chipotle game where he was dealing with the stomach flu or whatever. So A.J. Brown last week got back into wide receiver 2 status with a blow-up game, had a lot of targets, a lot of yards in that game. So I have no qualms about starting A.J. Brown each and every week. Julio Jones, on the other hand, though, was limited again in his role, despite reports that he might be, 100% or whatever. So as you guys can see on the screen, Julio Jones, the last couple of weeks has not been 100% of the routes. Obviously, in week 6, he left early. He re-aggravated his hamstring injury. And then in week 7, he was kind of limited to some capacity, wasn't out there for a lot of the routes. So he's a guy that I'm hesitantly starting as like a top 36 wide receiver. But I think if you have any more solidified options, or if you just want to play it safe, I suppose you could throw guys like Jarvis Landry or Jacoby Myers in ahead of Julio Jones, just because there is the risk that he's going to be limited again due to the hamstring injury. And we actually heard, speaking of limited with the hamstring injury, we did hear things that A.J. Brown was going to be limited. And that is true to some degree. He's only running about 60, 70% of the snaps, but the routes are there, right? You can see 89%, 87%, and 79% over the last 3 games, which is all we care about. We don't care that A.J. Brown's on the field run blocking. We want him to be running routes, and that's what he's doing. And you guys can see the target share over the last 3 weeks. It's absolutely phenomenal. So no concerns about A.J. Brown going forward. As you guys can see the matchups on the screen, Michael Pittman Jr. expect to see Janoris Jenkins in coverage, who's not been very good this year. So good matchup for him. A.J. Brown going up against Rodgers in coverage. Again, big advantage for him. And Julio Jones, assuming he plays a good allotment of the routes and the snaps, should see a lot of Xavier Rhodes in coverage as well. But both those outside guys will kind of, go back and forth where they play on either side of the field. At the tight end position, I'm sitting Mo Alley Cox. He's basically running like 40% of the routes. Not a guy that I think you should rely on. He's a touchdown or bust tight end, back end, like tight end 2 type. I don't even think he's worth a roster spot at this point. So to the Rams at Texans in this game, it's pretty straightforward. You're going to start Cooper Kupp, you're going to start Robert Woods, and you're going to start Brandon Cooks. And with the Rams guys, we know what we're getting. We're getting an elite wide receiver 1 in Cooper Kupp and a borderline wide receiver 2 type with Robert Woods. With Brandon Cooks, we've kind of seen him have a little bit up and down production, but I talked about him on Tuesday as a big time buy low candidate, especially if Tyrod Taylor is back for this game. It sounds like he might be back for this game, but for sure he'll be back next week. So Tyrod Taylor is a big contributing factor to the fact that I think Brandon Cooks is going to be back on track. We saw the Mark Ingram trade yesterday, which did clear up this backfield. So I'll quickly touch on that because I didn't know that information yesterday. David Johnson is a guy that a lot of people are going to want to start this week. I'm personally of the wait and see approach. David Johnson's going to come in around that RB30 range for me. So if you have better options, I would rather start them than David Johnson. I want to see how this Lindsey and David Johnson split is going to work out before I just blindly throw David Johnson into my lineup and assume he's going to be what he was last year, because it's a different coaching staff. We don't know how they're going to deploy these 2 running backs. So that's, my thoughts on the running back situation. On the wide receivers, obviously, though, Texans are no pushover for the Rams wide receivers against the pass, ranking top 12 in both adjusted fantasy points allowed to wide receivers and pass defense DVOA. It's the reason we didn't see, DeAndre Hopkins and Christian Kirk go absolutely hog wild last week. Texans are actually a pretty good pass defense. So I don't expect Cooper Kupp to go for 40 points, but although I did say that last week facing the Lions, and he did go for 40 points. So I could be wrong about that. But as you guys can see, matchups on the screen right now, Cooper Kupp going up against Tavir Thomas in coverage should be an easy one for him. Van Jefferson actually ran a season high in routes last week with like 93%. And Deshaun Jackson was almost not involved at all. So he might be a guy that is a little bit more interesting as like a streaming low-end flex option going forward, but I wouldn't start him in this game. Specifically, Robert Woods against Terrace Mitchell in coverage. He does have, pretty much the best matchup on the field as far as what these guys have given up all season. And then Brandon Cooks expected to split time between Jalen Ramsey and Rochelle. So a guy that I am still willing to start this week, especially if Tyrod Taylor is going to start this game. At the tight end position, we have Tyler Higbee, of course, ran a season high 96% of the Rams routes last week. It's only a matter of time, in my opinion, before Tyler Higbee has a big performance or has some big performances. So he's a guy that I think if you need a tight end and you don't want to spend up for, an elite guy or anything, I don't mind sending out some feeler offers for Tyler Higbee. Hell, somebody might even have him as their second tight end on their roster right now. And I think Tyler Higbee is a guy that you can start each and every week with the way this Rams offense is efficient and how much they throw the ball. I think he's a guy that needs to be started every single week. So moving from this game to the Steelers at Browns, in this game, you can start Deontay Johnson, start Chase Claypool, and I think you can flex Jarvis Landry pretty comfortably as well. And I'm sitting Odell Beckham Jr. until he does something, basically. Outside of the Broncos game, on Deontay Johnson's side of things, he's seen 10 or more targets in every game this season outside of that 2-target game he had against Denver. And of course, we know Chase Claypool is the big play creator of this offense. He's the touchdown scorer. He will be inconsistent at times, but he's still the guy that I'm throwing into my wide receiver 3 spot or my flex spot each and every week because he will reward you for playing him eventually. He's going to have those big games like we saw right before the bye. So Chase Claypool, a guy that's always in my lineup for better or for worse. On the Browns side of things, Jarvis Landry did play limited snaps in his first game back from the knee injury that he sustained with only 61% of the routes, but he did have a 23% target share in his first game back, should be back to his full role of 80-90% of the routes, and he actually might have Baker Mayfield back for this week. So he's currently my wide receiver 36 in my rankings right now. I have Odell outside my top 45. Again, I just don't want to start Odell until I know he's 100% healthy, until I see him commanding more targets, because it's been a problem for him ever since really he came back from his ACL tear. He hasn't been a guy that's consistently commanding targets. So matchups on the screen right now, Deontay Johnson versus Denzel Ward. Again, not the greatest matchup for Deontay Johnson. Jarvis Landry against Arthur Mollett in the slot should be a good matchup for him. And then Chase Claypool splitting time versus Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome on the outside. Odell Beckham against Cam Sutton in coverage. So again, not the greatest matchup in terms of expecting a lot of points in this game. I think this is going to be a rough and tumble AFC North type of game that we're dealing with here, probably like a 24-17 type of game. So not expecting a whole lot of points in this one, not actively targeting this game with my start sit decisions or in DFS. So to the tight end position, I think you could sit all the tight ends in this game, but if you have room on your roster, I think Pat Freiermuth is a decent stash if you need some upside at tight end, because it sounds like Eric Ebron's role is going to start diminishing and Pat Freiermuth's role is going to be increasing based on some of the reports that we've heard. And we know since Juju is out now, they're probably going to shift towards more of a tight end centric approach in the short and intermediate game. So I don't mind him as a stash. So moving on to the Eagles at Lions. In this game, you're going to basically just start Devontae Smith and that's it. You never start any of the Lions wide receivers anyway. And all the Eagles secondary wide receivers are not very involved in the offense. I'll pretty much keep this one brief. Devontae Smith has a 24% target share, and Detroit is 27th in pass defense DVOA and just got absolutely torched by Cooper Kupp. So a lot of people are going to be touting this one as the Devontae Smith breakout game. I'm sure he's going to be very popular in DFS this week. He's expected to see a lot of Jerry Jacobs in coverage, actually shadow coverage, according to PFF, who surrendered most of the damage to Cooper Kupp last week and the touchdown to Van Jefferson on the goal line last week. So a guy that should be in for a big game, but again, we never know with this Eagles offense. We thought the Buccaneers game would be the Devontae Smith breakout game, and we didn't necessarily see that. So if he's chalky in DFS, which I expect him to be, he's probably going to be a guy that I avoid this week, although he is a good start in standard redraft leagues. At the tight end position, start both tight ends in this game. We saw Goddard see a big bump to nearly 90% of the routes with Zach Ertz gone. In my opinion, he's a locked and loaded top 10 guy for the rest of the season. Of course, we know TJ Hawkinson has gotten back on track in terms of target share the last couple of weeks. Haven't yet seen a big game out of TJ Hawkinson, but a guy that I think could have a big one in this one against the Eagles. So moving on to the 49ers at Bears, this one has a sub 40 over under. The over under on this game right now is like 38.5. So not an appealing game from a fantasy perspective. In this game, I would just be starting Deebo Samuel and sitting every other receiver. This game is just littered with disappointments in fantasy this year. Brandon Ayuk and Allen Robinson might literally be the biggest busts in fantasy this year. Robinson and Mooney, both of them have 25% target shares each. And it really doesn't matter because Matt Nagy doesn't trust Justin Fields at all. The Bears rank dead last in neutral pass rate at 35%. 35% of the time they're passing the ball, which means they're running the ball at just extremely high rates. And who can blame them? Khalil Herbert's running well, but you got to let your rookie quarterback cook a little bit. And in my opinion, these guys are all just unstartable. Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, anybody in this passing game is unstartable because this team just doesn't pass the ball. And even last week when they were in a pass-heavy game script, they still barely cracked 30 pass attempts. Like, it's insane to me. So on the screen right now, you guys can see the matchup for Deebo Samuel. Of course, he's been excellent, so he's probably going to perform regardless of matchup. A guy that's commanding a 33% target share, which is right up there with the Cooper Kupps of fantasy this year. Expected to see a split between Kendall Vildor and Jalen Johnson this week in coverage. At the tight end position, like I said, Kmet isn't getting the usage or the targets that we need necessarily just because this offense isn't throwing the ball enough. He is getting the routes and stuff that we want, but not necessarily the targets. So guy that you can't start, nor can you probably even stash him until we see a dramatic change in this Bears passing offense. To the next game that we have here, an NFC South showdown, Panthers at Falcons. Start DJ Moore, start Calvin Ridley. I would say start Cordero Patterson, but I just think of him as a running back. But if you can play him at wide receiver, obviously start him as well and sit Robbie Anderson. So for the love of God, figure out your shit, Sam Darnold. It's actually driving me insane because he's ruining a perfectly good DJ Moore breakout season. DJ Moore is currently top 6 at the wide receiver position in target share with nearly 30% of the Carolina Panthers targets, 40% of the Carolina Panthers air yards, but he ranks 77th in catchable pass rate. So Sam Darnold not playing well, not what we expected to see at the beginning of the season when we saw Sam Darnold looking like the next Ryan Tannehill. That was definitely more exciting than what we're seeing right now. So DJ Moore, hopefully Sam Darnold can figure his shit out because DJ Moore will be, hamstrung by Sam Darnold to some extent if he can't figure his shit out. On Calvin Ridley, he's also been a little bit frustrating. And so help me God, if I see another person compare him to Juju Smith-Schuster when Antonio Brown left, I'm going to lose my freaking marbles on Twitter. Go buy Calvin Ridley low before his adjusted fantasy points catch up because this guy's like a top 10 receiver in expected fantasy points this year. And he's just simply not getting it done, whether it's because he's getting pass interfered with, which has happened. I've been watching the games, or he's just getting simply unlucky. It's going to change eventually. Calvin Ridley is too good. He's not some bum receiver that can't perform without Julio on the field. This Falcons offense is coming into its own. They're realizing that they need to feed Ridley, they need to feed Pitts, and they need to feed Patterson to win games. So I expect Calvin Ridley to eventually have a big game here at some point. So a guy that I'm definitely buying low if I can. Calvin Ridley is expected to see shadow coverage from Dante Jackson, but shouldn't be too much of a problem for him. DJ Moore expected to split time between AJ Terrell and Fabian Moreau. Robbie Anderson, again, I'm not messing around with Robbie Anderson this week, despite the targets, but also expected to see some Fabian Moreau and Richie Grant in the slot. At the tight end position in this game, all hail Kyle Pitts. So far, my biggest hit of these trade target videos that I do every Tuesday has been when I told you guys to buy Kyle Pitts after personally doing it myself prior to the London game. 80% of the routes, like usual, has been the case for Kyle Pitts pretty much all season, but 27 targets in his last three games has been absolutely beautiful to see. And I highly doubt Matty Ice is going to stop throwing him the ball, seeing as that he's turned those 27 targets into 350 yards and a touchdown. So this is a guy that I think is going to continue to stay involved in this offense, continue to potentially even limit Calvin Ridley to some degree, because I think Pitts is simply that good. He's being used downfield. He leads all tight ends in air yards right now. So absolutely excellent to see. If you guys do have Kyle Pitts, I think he's the tight end 2 rest of the season, like legitimately over Darren Waller. I think he's the tight end 2. So moving on to the next game, we have the Dolphins at Bills. In this game, you're going to be starting Stephon Diggs, starting Emmanuel Sanders, starting Jalen Waddle, and I think you could probably low-end flex Cole Beasley, but more likely a sit if you have better options. Diggs and Sanders have been reaping the massive benefits of playing in one of the NFL's most pass-heavy offenses. As you guys can see on the screen, this tweet from Dwayne McFarland, he basically outlines the fact that the Bills are running so many plays and the Seahawks, conversely, are running so little plays that the Bills are on pace to basically play 4 more games than the Seahawks, just based on how many plays that they're running on offense per game, which is actually incredible to see because like, I'm going to go on a mini rant here, but understanding pace and pass rates are so crucial to understanding how big of a pie, I use that term all the time, you're dealing with, because all offseason we heard things about certain offenses like the Steelers and Seahawks and things of that nature. Like, there's too many mouths to feed, right? We hear things like that all the time. But if the pie is as big as what the Bills pie is, then it's okay. We don't need to worry about there's too many mouths to feed, because they throw the ball a lot. They run a lot of plays. They're very up-tempo, so they can support multiple receivers. I think all three of these receivers are top 40 receivers pretty much each and every week, with Diggs being a top 15, top 10 receiver, and Sanders being a top 24 guy. So no worries about starting those guys. They are expected to see some shadow coverage in this game from Byron Jones and Xavier Howard. But again, I'm not really worried about it, because those guys have been pretty inconsistent, and this offense is good enough to overcome a bad matchup like that. So for Waddle on the other side of things, he draws a tough one against Teron Johnson, who's allowed less than 50% of the passes targeted his way to be completed on him, and a passer rating of 60. So Jalen Waddle is a guy that I have just inside my top 36, but I don't think he's a must start necessarily if you have better options, because Teron Johnson has been very good in the slot. Now, at the tight end position in this game, Dawson Knox, we know, is out for a couple weeks with a hand injury, but Mike Gesicki on the other side of things is one of the weirdest storylines I've ever seen at the tight end position, because this guy legitimately went from not on the field, not playing, and on the waiver wire of most fantasy leagues, to a guy that is getting elite route participation and elite targets at the position. It's really freaking weird that this guy went from unusable to elite in like the span of a couple weeks. So Mike Gesicki, again, until I see otherwise, this is a guy that's a top 6 tight end rest of the season, because he is getting the targets, he's getting the routes, he's running 85, 90% of the routes for the Dolphins offense. And this offense also is throwing the ball quite a bit too. And despite them not being very explosive downfield, they're using these short and intermediate targets a lot, like Jalen Waddle and like Mike Gesicki. So before we get into the later video, we're going to hear a word from our sponsor, Manscaped. Got to pay some bills around here. So taking a break before we talk about players who catch footballs, a word on how you guys can protect your own balls. This video is brought to you by Manscaped, the premier brand for men's grooming below the waist. With the world now opening back up, the Performance Package 4.0 has you completely covered. The brand new Lawnmower 4.0 is the biggest X factor in men's grooming currently available, offering a Devontae Adams-like impact to your manly parts. The 4th generation waterproof trimmer features a ceramic blade to help reduce grooming accidents thanks to their advanced skin-safe technology. It has a 7,000 RPM motor, a new multifunction on-off switch that can engage a travel lock, and it gives you the ability to turn on the 4K LED spotlight on and off when you need to see what you're doing down there. Included in the Performance Package 4.0 is your Weed Whacker as well to fulfill your nose and ear hair trimmer needs, Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant, and Crop Reviver Toner, plus a slick and comfortable addition to the package with the Performance Boxer Brief, as well as a travel bag to help you keep it all together. In addition to the Performance Package 4.0, Manscaped is proud to introduce their all-new Crop Cleanser. Have you guys smelled the Manscaped Refined Body Wash? Fellas, I promise your significant other will love this scent. It's something that smells incredible. It'll make you smell really good, makes you feel really good coming out of the shower in the morning. We appreciate the support that Manscaped has provided to the Fantasy Stock Exchange YouTube channel. I'm a personal user of the brand. I've been a user of the brand before they were a sponsor of the show. They are the leaders in male grooming. Join the 2 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped for their shower time routine by going to manscaped.com and using promo code BUSH. Yes, that is not how I got the nickname. I told you I've been a user of theirs for a while, for 20% off and free shipping. That's right. Promo code BUSH for 20% off and free shipping of their Performance Package 4.0. Stiff arm your pubes out of the playoffs this year with Manscaped and make sure your balls are worth catching. All right, the 4 p.m. games, and a big thanks to Manscaped for sponsoring this video. Pats at Chargers is the first 4 p.m. game that we have here. In this game, you're going to be starting Mike Williams, starting Keenan Allen, flexing Jacoby Myers. I've seen a lot of people point to the fact that the Chargers and Patriots played last year, and last year when they played, Herbert had a bad game, and he wasn't necessarily great for fantasy, but we know Bill Belichick's history with rookie quarterbacks, so I'm not as worried about Justin Herbert as some people might be. I think he actually is a really good DFS target if his ownership's going to be very low. The Pats are currently league average against the pass right now, 14th in DVOA against the pass, and they just lost Jonathan Jones, presumably for the entire season. So he's one of their best corners, him and JC Jackson. So I'm very much expecting this Chargers offense to produce fantasy points. Another week with no touchdowns, though, on the other side of things for Jacoby Myers. Just continue to throw him into your flex. He's going to get into the end zone eventually. It's only a matter of time. And as you guys can see on the screen, these are the matchups with no Jonathan Jones in the lineup. We are expecting Mike Williams to see Juwan Williams, which is a big time matchup advantage for him. Keenan Allen expected to see Jalen Mills in the slot. Jacoby Myers Chris Harris Jr. in the slot on the Charger side of things. So not the greatest matchup for Jacoby Myers. Again, a guy that's like just inside my top 36, top 40 wide receivers. You should have better options if you're deciding between multiple guys. Jacoby Myers, not a guy that I'm overly excited about starting in this game. At the tight end position in this one, start Hunter Henry and start Jared Cook, but only if you're desperate. 3 straight games of over 65% of the routes for Hunter Henry and pretty solid target numbers as well as red zone usage for Hunter Henry. I think he's an every week back end tight end 1. He's relegated Jonnu Smith basically to just like a gadget role. He's not even playing more than 20-30% of the routes at all right now. So Jonnu Smith, pretty much a big bust signing for the Patriots, but Hunter Henry has worked out so far. So good on them for signing 2 of them, I guess. Like 50% of the time your signings work out. I don't know. I think they should have just signed Hunter Henry and let somebody else sign Jonnu Smith because I had a feeling this was going to happen. So Jags at Seahawks, the next game that we have here. In this game, you're going to be starting DK Metcalf and Marvin Jones. Flex Tyler Lockett. I think you can low-end flex Laviska Shenault as well. This Seahawks offense is simply not good enough to support more than just DK Metcalf. Even before Russell Wilson got injured, Tyler Lockett wasn't good. He was a guy that was at 3 down games before the Rams game that Russell Wilson got injured in. Week 1 and 2, he was phenomenal, right? He had blow-up games. I have him at wide receiver 33 this week, and it even seems too high because it looked like it looks like I was correct fading Tyler Lockett this offseason because of the inconsistencies and the feast or famine nature that we've seen out of him. And it's only gotten worse with Geno Smith in there because we're not getting those deep game-breaking plays with Russell Wilson out of the lineup. It sounds like Russell Wilson's going to be back pretty soon, in the next couple of weeks or so. But as of right now, I'm not really willing to buy into Tyler Lockett. If you're a contender, if you're 6-1 or you're 7-0 or 5-2 right now, I don't mind throwing out some feeler offers for Tyler Lockett because he could turn things around late in the season when Russell Wilson comes back. But I think it is a bit of a risk knowing that the team is probably not going to be good at that point. They might not have a whole lot to play for, but they don't have the first round pick. So I'm sure they're not going to want to just gift a high pick for the New York Jets. On the other side of things, though, we have Marvin Jones. He's the clear number 1 in Jacksonville, as far as I'm concerned. Laviska Shenault did see an increased role last week before the bye, playing over 80% of the team's routes, which was clearly a season high for him. And he wasn't just playing in 11 personnel, which is great news. I know Dwayne McFarland, who does these utilization reports, was very hyped to see that. I personally have Laviska Shenault at wide receiver 40. So he is legitimately the last wide receiver I consider a flex option or a start option this week. So he's right on that borderline. I think he is a guy that you could throw into your lineup in a good matchup, given his recent usage and maybe coming out of the bye week. They use him even more than they were using him before. So on the screen right now, you guys will see the matchups. DK Metcalf, expected to see Nevin Lawson in coverage. Again, no problem starting DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett against Shaquille Griffin, bit of a tougher matchup there. Laviska Shenault against DJ Reed. Marvin Jones against Sidney Jones. Marvin Jones should be in for a good one this week against the Seahawks. So moving on from the wide receiver position to the tight end position in this game. Again, Dan Arnold, low-end streamer, but that's pretty much it. Same with Gerald Everett. I don't really feel like starting either of these guys. But Dan Arnold, if you had to choose, if you had to pick somebody off the waiver wire because you have Waller or Andrews on bye, Dan Arnold, I suppose you could do worse. Washington football team at Denver Broncos. The next game that we have here, start Terry McLaurin in this game, start Cortland Sutton in this game, and I think you can flex Jerry Jeudy. Now, Terry McLaurin is a stud. You play him every week. No worries there. But Jerry Jeudy is the real storyline in this game. Jerry Jeudy apparently could have played last week. A lot of, Broncos beat reporters said that he could have played if they wanted him to, but with 10 days rest coming off of a Thursday night game, it does make sense for them to just wait and have him not limited last week and play him at full strength this week. So it's interesting to see how this offense is going to change, if at all, because Jerry Jeudy commanded 7 targets in the first 3 quarters before injuring himself in week 1. I personally think Jerry Jeudy could be like the Jenga piece to this offense, could really unlock the offense being a lot more explosive and a lot more consistent, because we've seen, and as a Javonte Williams owner, I've seen this firsthand, is that this offense is stalling drives very often. I think if they had a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who's the possession receiver, chain mover type, then they'd probably sustain some more offense and score some more points. So hopefully with Jerry Jeudy back in the fold, Noah Fant healthy, Cortland Sutton healthy, and both of those running backs, this offense might legitimately turn into a top 15 unit in no time, because I think, like I said, Jerry Jeudy is the Jenga piece to this offense. And I think he kind of elevates everybody involved. There's more touchdown upside to go around, lighter boxes for the running backs, sustained drives for the running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. So hopefully Jerry Jeudy can make an impact in this offense. And again, if somebody's a little hesitant on him, that maybe has held on to him or maybe traded for him low, I don't mind sending out offers for him either, because I think he could legitimately be a second half darling in fantasy this year, because I really believed in him coming into the season. So As you guys can see on the screen, these are the matchups. Jerry Jeudy against Danny Johnson in coverage. I honestly don't even know who that guy is. Probably a good matchup for him. Cortland Sutton versus Kendall Fuller. Sorry, not Kyle Fuller. I make that mistake all the time. In coverage, so he should be in for a good one in this one. And then Terry McLaurin against Ronald Darby in coverage. Also a pretty solid matchup for him. So overall, pretty solid matchup all around for these wide receivers. At the tight end position, Ricky Seals-Jones and Noah Fant, still every week starters for me, still top 12 tight ends, especially given the usage that both of these guys see, high percentage of their team's routes and a good percentage of their targets as well. So moving on to the final 4 p.m. game, and I can't believe I didn't say this yesterday, but it's officially fuck the Saints week. As a Tampa Bay Buccaneers fan, I absolutely hate the Saints. So if you're a Saints fan, I'm sorry, but fuck the Saints. I hate the Saints. So Buccaneers at Saints, the game that we have this week. Start Chris Godwin and start Mike Evans. Now, the Saints have turned the corner a little bit in recent weeks, passing at about a league average rate in neutral pass script. So it's better news knowing that Michael Thomas is coming back soon and they're passing the ball a little bit more. But as of right now, I still can't start Traquan Smith or Marquez Callaway, even in a pretty good matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who've been susceptible to the pass this year. I'm still not going to mess around with those guys. I just don't. You never know who's going to catch balls in this game from this team. So I'm not really willing to mess around with them. I'm just going to play Alvin Kamara on this side of the ball and probably not worry about anything else. Chris Godwin, though, is in for an absolutely smash game, right? We all know, I'm sure everybody listening to this knows what I'm about to say. Mike Evans will be shadowed by Marshawn Lattimore. Marshawn Lattimore has had a lot of success shadowing Mike Evans in the past. You guys can see the numbers on the screen right now. That first one is kind of an asterisk because Mike Evans had a hamstring injury in week 1 of last year, which is what that game was. And he also had an injury in one of these other games too. But as you guys can see, it's really only been one game out of the 8 times that they've played each other that Mike Evans has had his number. So I would put my money. The odds say that Mike Evans probably doesn't have a great game in this one, which would lead to Chris Godwin and potentially Rob Gronkowski, who I'll talk about in a second, having a good one in this one. So Chris Godwin, going to be a guy that I really target in DFS lineups. I'm sure he's going to be highly owned, going to be very chalky, but a guy that I'm going to be targeting nonetheless. The Saints are quietly giving up the 3rd most adjusted fantasy points to wide receivers as well, which is not something I expected to see when I looked up that number. I thought the Saints had been very good against wide receivers, but they have been pretty bad, actually, to be honest. So like I said, you guys can see the matchups on the screen. Mike Evans is expected to see shadow coverage. Chris Godwin should be up against a lot of Paulson Adebo on the outside and a lot of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson in the slot. Marquez Callaway and Traquan Smith, those are their matchups. But like I said, I'm not messing around with those two guys. At the tight end position, Rob Gronkowski did return to practice on Wednesday. If he plays, he's a top 6 tight end because, like I said, Mike Evans is probably not going to have the greatest game in this one. Chris Godwin can't do everything. Gronkowski is probably going to catch a touchdown or be involved in this game plan nonetheless. So if he plays, he's going to be a guy that I throw into my lineup. Now, to Sunday Night Football. Cowboys at Vikings. A lot of fantasy goodness in this one. Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, all in your lineup, right? Wide receiver bonanza in this game. Start them all. The advantage matchup-wise favors the Vikings wide receivers, with the Cowboys giving up the 7th most adjusted fantasy points to the wide receiver position, and Minnesota giving up the 20th most. So again, the Vikings wide receivers could be in for a big game in this one. While Trevon Diggs is expected to shadow Justin Jefferson, and it will be a fun matchup to watch, don't downgrade Justin Jefferson too much just because of the shadow matchup, because Trevon Diggs has allowed a 35-plus yard catch in every game this season except for week 1, including the long bomb touchdown that he allowed against the Patriots before the bye week. Despite leading the NFL in interceptions, Trevon Diggs has also allowed 419 yards in his coverage, which I believe ranks top 5 among the quarterback position. So again, I'm not worried about Justin Jefferson in this game. Should be a fun battle between those two guys. And Trevon Diggs will probably get a pick in this game, but I'd imagine Justin Jefferson should be able to do damage as well. Adam Thielen, though, as a result of that shadow matchup, does have the easier matchup of the two Vikings wide receivers. And as you guys can see, he sees Anthony Brown in coverage. Amari Cooper sees Bashaud Breeland. CeeDee Lamb sees Cameron Dantzler. Breeland has pretty much been the worst of those two corners, so Amari Cooper could be in for a big game in this one as well. At the tight end position, start Dalton Schultz in this game. Highest over-under on the slate at 55. And Dalton Schultz has at least 6 targets in each of the last 4 games. So he's a guy that I'm willing to throw into my lineup as a top 10 tight end this week as well. Now to the final game of the slate, and that's Monday Night Football, Giants at Chiefs. For the Giants, we really don't know who's playing. So I can't give you guys a straight answer right now. Again, ask me about him later in the week or on the Monday live stream before the game. But in this game, you're obviously going to be starting Tyreek Hill. And for the Giants, Sterling Shepard was ruled out late last week. He went to warmups and practice to see if he could play. They deemed that he wasn't able to play. So maybe he'll be back for this week. They have an extra day of rest playing on Monday night. Maybe that means he's going to be playing, but Kadarius Toney seems like a bit more of a long shot based on what we've heard so far. But if both are playing, both are back end wide receiver threes, both are guys that I would play in my top 40 because this is a good matchup for them. If just Sterling Shepard plays, he's about wide receiver 30 if everybody else is out and he's the only one active. So that's the way I'm kind of handling that wide receiver core. As you guys can see, the matchups on the screen right now, Tyreek Hill expected to see Darnay Holmes in the slot, but I'd imagine when he's on the outside, they'll probably shadow him with James Bradbury. So that's something to monitor, but I think Tyreek Hill should be just fine. The Giants have not been good against wide receivers. So RIP to anybody who plays against Tyreek Hill in fantasy this week because he could have a monster game. Dante Pettis will probably be replaced by Sterling Shepard in this matchup chart. So if Sterling Shepard does play, he's probably going to see L'Jarius Sneed in the slot. So tight end in this game, of course, start Travis Kelce and give up on Evan Ingram. That's everything, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, like the video if you enjoyed, comment any of your thoughts down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you want access to the weekly rankings, dynasty rankings, rest of season rankings, you can go to the website, thefantasystockexchange.com. Make sure to follow along with me on Twitter. I'm always tweeting out fun stuff for fantasy as well at Football Stock. You guys can see it on the screen. Peace out. I'll talk to you soon.